want you, I need you, oh God. I need these beautiful things that I've got.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our panel debate on market design. Before we start, I understand it's difficult to leave the terrace, beautiful that it is, but if anyone is on the terrace and would like to find out what is happening about market design, come now, because we are talking about it. My name is Siobhan Hall. I am the Brussels correspondent for Montel News, and I am delighted to be here with you today with our distinguished speakers. I'm just going to take a moment to allow our speakers to introduce themselves just with their name and where they're from, starting with.
Good afternoon. I'm Paddy Hayes. I'm the Chief Executive of ESB. It's an electricity utility based in Ireland with businesses Ireland, Northern Ireland and Great Britain. We see our purpose really as driving the transition to a low carbon future through clean electricity.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mara Berzinja. I am the CR, Council of European Energy Regulators Secretary General. Very pleased to be here and represent the regulators' perspective on this stage.
Hello, everyone. Kalispera. It's great being here. My name is Kostas Theodoropoulos. As you can understand, I'm from Greece, and it's the first time that I can say my last name, and some people can understand it at least. I'm a senior principal with AFRY. Hopefully, some of you know AFRY. We're an energy consultancy, a boutique energy consultancy, and we're going to be talking about market design.
So excellent. So we have some experienced speakers, and later Kostas is going to give us a keynote address, and then we'll have a panel debate. But I'm very pleased to start with a video message from the Energy Environment Minister from Portugal, Maria de Graça Carvalho, who, as many of you probably know, she was the rapporteur in Brussels. She was an MEP, a member of the European Parliament in Brussels, and she works on the electricity market design regulation and also the REMIT regulation. So we have a video message from her. Please watch.
Good morning. As a former member of the European Parliament from 2019 until little over a month ago, I was deeply involved in reshaping the electricity market. Namely, I was the European People's Party negotiator in the review of the electricity market design. I was also the rapporteur of the revision of the regulation on energy market transparency. These are two very important files to ensure not just a successful energy transition, but the strategy independence and the resilience of the European energy sector. In both these files, I was guided by a set of main principles. For the electricity market design, these principles were: first, consumers at the center, enhancing protection, empowerment against prices fluctuations. Second, incentives for investment, encouraging a better and wider use of instruments for longer-term investments like power purchase agreements and contracts for difference. Thirdly, strengthening the internal energy market, stressing the importance of an efficient green development, the need of further investments in the networks and related infrastructures, and preparing the energy market for the future through innovation, digitalization, and a decentralization of the market. And for the REMIT, the principles, I would say, first, legal coherence and transparency, enabling a more clarity in the regulation and a better alignment with other pieces of EU legislation. Secondly, strengthen the European dimension through the enforced scope of the Agency of the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, ACER, and its cooperation with the national regulators. And lastly, a reinforced market, achieved with measures aimed at removing red tape, unnecessary barriers, and reporting contribute to a reinforced market. In the end, thanks to a good cooperation, especially with the main stakeholders in the market, I believe we have arrived at very positive results in both files. On EMD, we offer consumers a better protection against market fluctuations, not just to consumers in situations of energy poverty, but to all of them including individual families, SMEs, large business, industry. This was done by offering a more fixed price contracts and encouraging solutions such as renewable energy communities, self-consumption, and energy sharing. Regarding investments, we support the use of long-term instruments aiming to improve integration and liquidity of the markets. Not exclusive by articulation with some effective existing schemes. At the same time, we introduced measures to make this market more flexible, particularly in terms of supply and demand and energy storage. Finally, on the internal market front, we place the focus on interconnections. We cannot have a true energy single market in some member states if they continue to be islands without access to this network. With REMIT, I would highlight specific actions, the enforcement of the European capability, the power of ACER in investigations of specific cross-border cases, always bearing in mind the importance of keeping national authorities in the driver's seat. Also, an adequate integration of other existing provisions, namely on LNG, and several measures aimed at reducing administrative burden. In short, I am happy with the solutions we were able to reach, and in my new capacity as Minister of the Portuguese government on energy and environment, I look forward to implementing them in my country. As always, your input of all the stakeholders and your suggestions will be most valuable. Thank you very much.
I know. It's always slightly strange to clap a video, but we're very glad that she made the video and that we got her comments, because she was very instrumental in helping shape the market design legislation, which, as you probably know, was finally signed off by the EU Council yesterday. So now we're going to move to the keynote speech by Kostas.
Thank you, no last name. Thanks, well done, Siobhan. So, hello everyone. I'm just going to check and make sure that you can... Excellent. So we chose a fitting picture because we thought it was going to be very warm and you should see some snow to feel a bit cooler. So decarbonization has been at the heart, was and it still is at the heart of the European policy agenda for many years now. However, in the past, it was much more along the lines of we need to find ways to support renewables to enter the markets. So to some extent, there was a financial burden element to them in the previous decades. The energy crisis shifted the focus on the other two aspects of the energy trilemma. We started focusing much more on affordability and also security of supply. That is understandable. Member states took action and took some very immediate action in the form of price caps predominantly. But paradoxically, the long-term solution now appears to be, guess what, renewables. So renewables now appear to be the means to get to more affordable and more predictable electricity prices, but also to limit our reliance on gas. So the EMD reform, the electricity market design reform, is effectively the long-term response, so what came after the very initial regulatory interventions. There are three objectives. The one is protecting consumers, so protect consumers from what happened a couple of years back, stability for everyone, for our industries, but also for consumers, and competitive costs and prices for the European industry. The third one is to increase green electricity. And I could argue, and I personally don't see it as an objective in its own right, I see it as an enabler, an objective, but also an enabler for the other two. Because as I said earlier, now renewables are becoming a solution, not just for us to reduce our carbon emissions, but also to have more predictable prices and cheaper electricity. If I was asked to summarize the EMD reform, I would say retain spot markets, retain the philosophy of marginal pricing, and hedge. So it's all about hedging. The majority of the measures and the guidance that is provided within that is about offering different forms of hedging that should spill over to the consumers as well and the demand. So number one would be two-way CFDs contracts or equivalent. So for me, the or equivalent, I put a lot of emphasis on that. So we are intending to continue using these type of support instruments to bring in more low carbon generation technologies. Greater PPA uptake, so complementing, let's say, the support schemes to also get market-based renewables, so more on a more bilateral basis. But we should try to create the environment that attracts this. Capacity markets are now recognized as a much more structural element. It was not that long ago where capacity markets were considered a bit more of a temporary measure, but now it is being recognized, capacity markets are recognized as a structural element of the overall design. And from then on, it would be promoting further forward hedging for suppliers so that they are in a position to offer longer-term contracts to consumers and fixed prices to consumers. Now, I would say that the EMD reform is a good starting point for a net zero market design, but there's a lot of things that we need to consider, and we need further evolution to address the challenges of decarbonization. I'm going to borrow something from a speech this morning from Dimitris Papalexopoulos that said, we need to act, so we need to implement at some point as well. So yes, we do need to do our due diligence, but we need to also act very quickly and implement some of these changes very, very quickly. Because the challenges of decarbonization can be seen even today. So I'm going to mention a few, but there are a lot of others. Number one, we've seen this, and it's very relevant over the last couple of months, zero and negative prices. We have a record number already. We're going for a record number of zero and negative prices this year. This is challenging the economics of RES, and to some extent, renewables, the energy transition is kind of undermining itself. So we need to figure out ways of solving this. There is a need for not just backup capacity, but also flexibility and also stability. However, despite the fact that this is recognized, everyone knows that this exists, the business case is not so clear-cut, right? And we do have a lack of instruments that allow hedging and bringing technologies, and not just technologies, other solutions, because it doesn't have to be necessarily an asset per se. And grid congestion is on the rise, and redispatch costs are very, very high, and they will continue increasing. So what should a net zero market design look like? So I'm not going to offer a single solution. I'm going to offer some thoughts, effectively, and some principles that I think are very important. First and foremost, closer to real-time markets or spot markets should be at the core. They're very important. I've heard a lot of people, and a lot of people have asked me, how does a spot market work if everything that is on the system is effectively zero variable cost? And I say, if anything, they become even more important because the resources that do need the spot markets, the closer to real-time markets, are the weather variable renewables. Their availability is known much closer to real-time, and the demand, their availability is known much closer to real-time. So I would say we should double down to some extent in closer to real-time markets. The other one is we should start thinking beyond the simple megawatt-hour terms. And what do I mean by that? Typically, we discuss about the price of electricity, which is effectively the price of wholesale energy for providing a given settlement period. When I see someone quoting a zero price period, I also want to know at that same time, what is the value of reserve? What is the value of inertia? What is the value of all these other ancillary services that make up the reliable supply of electricity to our houses, okay? So for me, it is a matter of having a much broader picture of what we mean by a cost of electricity. And that should include also redispatch costs as well. Now, when it comes to capacity markets, I think capacity markets need to evolve. So we need to start thinking about capability/flexibility rather than capacity. Simple capacity, I need 1 megawatt to meet peak demand. And that starts off by thinking beyond the simple loss of load expectation measure that tells you, okay, in a given, I have a probability of losing the load for 3 hours in a given year. I want to know when are the subsequent hours, and I want to know how much as well. Now, one other aspect is, because we are at the same time trying to promote both government-supported long-term contracts, but also PPAs, and we want to have forward liquidity, there's a bit of tension. So by the two-way CFDs effectively detract some of the liquidity from the other markets. So we need to find ways of managing this and how we can make this work. And I'm going to keep this for later, so we'll discuss a little bit about, in the panel discussion, one idea on that. And finally, grid and locational signals. I know this is a very big thing, especially in Britain at the moment, the locational signals. This doesn't mean we need to have nodal pricing, right? We are so far away in Europe from that. It doesn't mean that. But we should have a way of recognizing the cost of transporting the electricity across our network. At the end of the day, however, we need to find smart solutions to manage our grid as it is today. But we will need to build grids, right? Let's not kid ourselves. Not everything can be managed by smart solutions. We will have to have some more cables. So we have been working quite a lot on the REMA, which is the equivalent, let's say, of the market reform in Britain. To some extent, Britain is one step ahead because the problems are more acute there. So they've been thinking about various things, and they've been looking at a much more holistic basis, like overhauling everything. They have made a lot of decisions already. Some way to go. My brief summary, and these things, can be borrowed, and they can be a lesson also for other European member states. I think we concluded that a revolutionary approach would be a mistake. So we are not at a stage that we should rip up everything we've got and effectively change everything radically. So it should be evolution rather than revolution. There is a need for centralized support and planning where we are today, given the scale of renewables we need to deploy. But we should be mindful that at some point this needs to tail off, and we need to allow for innovation and the market to choose the technology mix. Yeah, various other things that I've mentioned already to some extent. So I'm going to close off with one thought. We think about all the various technologies, assets on the system, storage, gas turbines, renewables, etc. I would say that the consumers and the people are effectively the most important part of the system, the most important element and resource on the system. At the end of the day, they can turn their lights on, and they have the choice to turn the lights off. So we should do the design that we have, the market design that we have, should be centered around the consumers and allowing them to have the choice and being able to effectively choose when and how much electricity they want to consume. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kostas. So that was an excellent summary of a very large piece of legislation. So congratulations, Kostas, for doing that. And we're going to dig into some of those topics a little bit more deeply. But first, I would like our panel to just tell us very briefly what their key points that they are interested in from the market design for the purpose of this debate. So we're going to start with Mara, 2 minutes, very brief.
That was an excellent, overview of the all legislation that is there, and also we had good information and kind of stages set at the first part of today. So I'm not going to repeat myself on where we are, though I am looking forward to bring some energy regulators' perspective into this, and legal and regulatory frameworks must be established to facilitate these all changes in orderly manner and remove any barriers to entry and evolution. However, EU regulators have observed that the existing legal framework inadequately addresses these challenges anticipated in the future electricity system in 2030 and beyond. These additional challenges arising from the energy system transformation are driven mainly by decarbonization goals. Some stem directly from the intermittent nature of most renewable energy sources, while others may result from indirect consequences of the energy transition, such as electrification that was mentioned, decentralization, and technology evolution. Those are all mentioned by all the various speakers already today. We believe that strong and independent energy regulators are crucial players in the energy transition as providers of expert advice and independent decisions. Therefore, EU energy regulators also pledge to proactively investigate options to address all these various challenges that were mentioned so far today. And we understand that it's not going to be easy, but we are all in the same boat, and the money is not getting any cheaper, so I suggest we all collaborate as much as possible.
Okay, thank you, Mara. And that's a good point because the regulators are often involved in how much people can spend. So that's a good point. So now we come to Paddy.
Thanks, Siobhan. So my perspectives when I think about markets are firstly, the market isn't perfect. It's far from perfect. And when we see it's particularly challenged when it's dealing with change and major change. So we saw that with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we heard about that this morning, the impact that that's having, even though the energy crisis aspect of that has maybe ameliorated a little bit. So markets are difficult, they're not perfect, they find change tough, but the question really is what's going to give us the best opportunity of getting to a secure and at least cost to net zero as quickly as we possibly can. And it strikes me that although it's not perfect, and although I would agree with Kostas, we're probably going to need more evolution and more change in the future. For now, we've been given the tools and the techniques in the latest legislation that give us a fighting chance of making significant progress over the next number of years. And we've got to grab that now and adopt it and implement it and work with it. Because again, going back to our keynote speaker this morning, we could spend a lot of time agonizing about this and trying to make something perfect for a future that we're not really clear about. So we've got the tools now. It's not perfect, but let's get on with it.
Okay, so basically, it's good enough. Let's actually implement stuff. And
for now.
For now.
And later on, if you've got the time, I'll tell you what I think about
okay, excellent.
the future.
I know there are many review clauses in the legislation, so there will be time to tweak it later in real life. Kostas, do you have a few point you want to add?
I will pick up on what Paddy said, then I'm gonna say the following. They're imperfect, I agree 100%. They worked. And they worked during the energy crisis, right? I know it's controversial, but at the end of the day, it's not the energy crisis was not a problem of the market design. They gave you the price signal. That's what they were supposed to do, and we reacted.
Okay, so we're going to continue with the panel debate, but I just want to alert you to the fact that we will want to take questions from the floor at the end. So if you would like to ask a question, start thinking if there is something you would like to ask, and we should have hopefully 5-10 minutes at the end to take a question. So have a think. It would be really lovely to have some interaction. Now, we're talking there about implementation and good enough for now and so on. One of the things that, Kostas, you mentioned straight up at the beginning was the importance of spot markets, and that the legislation has continued to say that marginal pricing and spot markets is the way to go. But how do you see the role of spot markets developing? Because obviously with more renewables in the system, that's going to affect how the markets work.
So Siobhan, as I said, I would say it's going to be increased. And the most important key point for me here is I think we have been used to thinking about electricity price formation in terms of the cost of supply. So typically, it's the gas that will be setting the price. We should start thinking that it's a two-way street. The demand expresses a willingness to buy. In the future, the price formation will be predominantly driven by demand. For example, electrolysis could be acting as the price setter to some extent when buying electricity. So increased is my very short response, if anything.
And then one of the things that we have noticed in the spot markets increasing recently is negative pricing. So do you have a view on how that might develop?
let's cross our fingers. So I think storage is going to help. So we are introducing storage on the system, and that is going to help. But at the end of the day, I think, as I said, the demand needs to become more active, and we need to have much more movable demand to remove this. At the end of the day, the negative prices are, I would call them artificial, but they're an effect of, of the support schemes to some extent.
Might I just jump in? So I think so spot price is really important, because how else do you get a signal to the demand side? So it's really important for a signal to demand side. On the other hand, and we heard some comments earlier on, there's a lot of effort to try and insulate customers in a different way from prices. So we're trying to so I think that spot price signal can be really important to either persuade customers to do something slightly different if they have the opportunity to do it, or to value the cost of the opportunity cost of doing something different, or it can be a signal to support investment in, certainly in short duration storage, and those things would be really could be really quite valuable. It starts to become problematic, I think, when it becomes really, really extreme, because when anything becomes extreme, people try to intervene differently. But somehow we're going to have to get that signal about the time of use to the people who can make a difference there, and whether that's investment in storage or whether that's changing your demand patterns. It's really important that that signal works its way through for now.
So I mean, Mara, we're hearing that there needs to be more consumer engagement. So the idea of demand response is trying to bring more flexibility to the market through demand response and consumers. I mean, this is something that, as energy regulators, consumers are a top priority for you. How do you see this developing?
Indeed, that is one of our top priorities at the back of our head, and we believe that consumers can play a crucial role in providing flexibility. And let's call it, we can buy the time in a short term with this flexibility, we believe so. And consumers, we understand, have different needs and characteristics, and therefore they should be given the variety of different choices, whether and how to adjust their consumption, both locally and support the electricity system. Accurate electricity price signals, as mentioned already by the other panelists, and network charges from the cornerstone for demand. They are the cornerstone of demand flexibility. They can incentivize consumers to engage and benefit from demand response alongside consumer protection and tailored energy advice frameworks. And furthermore, I just want to emphasize once again the vulnerable and protection of vulnerable consumers cannot be, left behind. And eventually, just a couple of, maybe let's call them recommendations or commitments. We would recommend the policymakers to ensure that the targeted and tailored support for vulnerable consumers is consistent with the wider social policies. And we as regulators, I would say, understand and commit that we have to provide different options for consumers to provide flexibility through electricity tariffs, ranging from predictable peak-off-peak tariffs to dynamic exposure and day-ahead prices. Also, we understand as energy regulators, and we will commit to ensure that network tariffs accurately reward flexibility while also remaining always cost-reflective.
Yeah, so that's obviously a key area for the regulators to regulate the grids. And on tariffs, I mean, that's quite a big issue.
It's really interesting, because when we start talking about markets, we're thinking, certainly I'm thinking about generation and demand. But of course, networks are right in the middle of this, and how networks get their remuneration and who pays for that, and whether there's the extent to which there's a time of day element to that. And because of course we're solving not just necessarily for a scarcity of generation, renewable generation at a system peak, we're also trying to solve, or the system is trying to solve, for congestion as well, and to try and do that in the least cost way. I think Kostas made a really interesting point earlier on. I mean, there is going to have to be investment. So the market is going to have to incentivize investment in flexibility and in storage, as also in renewable generation. but it's also going to have to incentivize, or there's a different way of making sure that we get the grid investment, whether it's in distribution, transmission systems. And ultimately, I think the customer has a real part to play, and there was some discussion earlier on about digitalization, and I think George was talking about smart metering rollout in Greece and Romania. I think the digitalization of that interface with the customer, with the distribution system, gives a real opportunity, maybe not to expose individual customers to extreme peaks, but maybe through aggregators or suppliers to use that information to work with the customers to actually then find something of sufficient value to offer it back to the system, whether it's about reduction in congestion or whether it's about peak shaving. So look, I think that area about the interface with the consumer and the demand side is going to be really important.
So in a sense, the digitalization might make it easier to, an individual customer may not be so interested in how things work, but if you can automate it externally, that would really help.
And somebody else says, I'll do that for you, and I'll give you, it won't cost you as much, or I'll give you a little bit of benefit, and I'll manage that for you. I think we've got the opportunities, and we're seeing that already in different places. The opportunity to do that is there. The technologies are emerging, and with a bit of imagination, it can happen. We probably still need that signal of some sort, price signal of some sort, to say to somebody, well, actually, it's worth electricity. We value electricity more at this time than this time, and you can save some money by changing your behavior.
So that's looking at the demand side response from a consumer level and from the user level in order to bring more flexibility to the system. But one of the things that Kostas mentioned in his keynote was about capacity markets becoming a structural part of the market as opposed to like a temporary fix whilst we sort everything else out. So how do you feel about the legislation on capacity markets?
Well, without trying to monopolize, I think I really welcome that. I mean, it's been obvious for a long time that that temporary fix was going to have to be needed into the future while this transition is happening, and it's clear that this low carbon, net zero transition is going to happen over a number of years. And during that time, to ensure that we have secure as well as green electricity, we need some form of capacity mechanism that remunerates investment that's being made with an expectation that its use is going to go down and down and down, and its load factor is going to go down and down and down, and it's not going to get much market running or market revenues. So I must say, from a perspective of working in regions where there's quite a high renewable penetration, the idea of capacity remuneration mechanism being a fundamental tool for the regulators and market designers, I think is a really welcome thing. Obviously, there's some downside. It can drown out that little signal, that pricing signal, the time of day signal. It can drown out the message to the consumer. But I do think it's really important during the energy transition.
Kostas, do you want to comment?
Yes, I think the question between energy only versus energy plus capacity is a bit philosophical to some extent, and depends on what you value. To some extent, you know, people value insurance. I buy insurance. It doesn't mean that my house is going to burn down. Effectively, a capacity market is something similar, right? You buy an insurance to make sure that you've got something available if something happens, or you've got very high demand. The only thing I would, reiterate from what I said before, we need to start evolving the capacity market. So they should start looking at differentiating different types of capacity and I would say resources and provision, again, because when you say capacity, people think only gas turbines, storage, etc. It could be demand-side response, right? We are talking about demand-side response here as well. So it should be level playing field and make a differentiation depending on what you're looking for.
And maybe if I could just jump in for what does long-term energy storage look like? Because for high renewable penetration systems, ultimately, you can see customer behavior dealing with the system peak. You can see short duration batteries already dealing with the system peak. Kostas and I were talking earlier on about Britain at the moment, where the sort of battery market is collapsing because lots of people have built into that. But that long duration storage where the wind isn't blowing for a number of days, how is that rewarded? How's that remunerated? And is that through some sort of capacity mechanism as opposed to some different type of market mechanism, I think is worth thinking about for the long term. Sorry, Mara.
Just to complement, maybe not to repeat what was already mentioned, that where the market signals and contracts do not lead to the sufficient investment, regulatory interventions in the form of support mechanisms can also play a role in ensuring the necessary investments. And where justified, support mechanisms design can drive additional investments and ensure security of supply. Furthermore, optimizing the interaction between flexibility and adequate support mechanisms can help minimize the costs to consumers while fostering investment decisions. And therefore, price signal schemes such as CFDs can also address the gap in the investment stability. Nevertheless, member states should carefully design all these support mechanisms to minimize the desertions of other markets. For these reasons, EU regulators call for a more coordinated best practice approach in designing these mechanisms, supported by the EU guidance, and therefore we invite again, we would suggest that European Commission develops guidelines and best design practices for contracts of difference, flexibility support schemes, and capacity mechanisms in order to implement those.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. Even though this is the European electricity market design, there is a lot of flexibility for the member states to implement it in many different ways. So it's not necessarily, no one is thinking there's going to be an EU contract for difference. They're all going to be very, very distinct. And then that was looking at how to find flexibility in the system. But we were also mentioned earlier today about the importance of infrastructure. And one of the issues is, if we're going to have more cross-border infrastructure, how do we allocate the costs based on that? So, Mara, do you have some views on allocating costs? Because this is what you do.
Exactly, that's our daily job. Basically, we believe in a holistic approach where electricity transmission infrastructure development should be closely coordinated with other energy sectors, particularly gas and hydrogen. In this respect, the current practice of the single sector needs assessments should be discontinued and replaced by a multi-sectoral planning, at least at EU level and also at national level. Coordination is also needed between developments at generation and grid levels, accommodating the different lead times for project completions. And finally, delays in infrastructure implementation will continue to demand the utmost attention of policy and decision markets. This requires efficient permitting rules and procedures, additional attention to public acceptance and awareness, stable and robust supply chains, and effective investment decisions making. And just again, I want to conclude maybe with a couple of suggestions for all of us in this respect, in this area, that we believe that, again, policymakers should amend the EU legislation to allow for a top-down approach to develop trans-EU infrastructure, and also amend the EU legislation to allow a fully multi-sectoral infrastructure planning at European level covering electricity, natural gas, and hydrogen. And also regulators are committed for some part of this old job, and that is to develop proposals for reforming the mechanisms for sharing the costs and benefits of network infrastructure. So we're all in.
Okay, and my takeaway from that is everything's about to get much more complex. I mean, than...
Well, yeah, as if it could. I mean, it doesn't, like, you wonder when is this ever going to, is the graph ever going to turn in terms of complexity? But it does seem complex. But I think the danger of that complexity is we can spend a lot of time agonizing and trying to get things exactly right and there are some really clear things that'll make a difference. We know we need more investment in renewables, generate. We know, and another zero carbon. We know that we need more investment in grids to link people up to that. We know that there's going to be electrification, and the decarbonisation of society is electrification is going to be a really, really key vehicle for that. We heard discussion earlier on about the efficiency aspects of the wonderful efficiency benefits of working through electricity rather than through some of the other primary sources that currently heat and transport us. So it is going to get more complex, but it's really important that we don't allow that to get in the way of progress, I think.
Okay, so again, please to still implement and work with what is there already, and you can always tweak it later if it needs to be tweaked later. So I want to check if there are any questions in the room. If you have a question, raise your hand. Yay, excellent. So we have several questions. We have a microphone. Maybe we start at the back and work our way forward. So if you keep your hand raised, we have 4 questions. If you can keep a question, keep it short, and say who it's directed to. There's a microphone coming.
Thank you, Siobhan. Thanks for an excellent session. I have a specific question for Paddy, but I think there might be general lessons to be learnt. Paddy, in Ireland, the capacity market has brought forward a fair amount of capacity that's bailed out. So you've had a lot of cancelled contracts there and agreements. What impact is that going to have on Ireland's security of supply in the next few years? And what lessons more generally can be learnt from the structure of the capacity market that has actually failed to deliver quite a lot of the capacity that we thought would be coming on?
Yeah, I think there are particular circumstances. It's always the danger with having an auction for something that happens in the future where the delivery is dependent on the planning rules and the environmental consenting process. And both of those processes are sometimes time-consuming and sometimes uncertain. So I think the real challenge is, and so firstly, Ireland, I think, is in a much better place now. There's been quite a lot of investment in capacity. We're bringing forward commissioning three of our own generators at the moment, but then there's also some state-sponsored emergency capacity going in. So I think Ireland's capacity is still tight, but going to be in much better shape now than what it was a couple of years ago. But the real learning is that it takes a long time to bring capacity through. And therefore, it was really, my view is it was really important that the market, if you talk about the capacity market, that the capacity market was signalling well in advance of a 4-year capacity contract that capacity would be required, so that the potential investors and developers of that capacity had done things like making sure that they had planning permission in advance of that, making sure that they had environmental permits in advance of that, so that there was certainty at the time when they took the contract, even though the auction process allowed for that uncertainty to be there and understood that this wasn't ready, that certainty needs to be there. And my view is that developers don't make those sort of investments this is the pre-auction investment, which is quite significant, unless they can see that longer-term potential for further capacity auctions coming through the system. Those signals are there from the Irish government now and from the regulators and from the grid, who are saying we will need this amount of capacity going forward. We've now got the mandate from the European Commission that says this is a long duration or a standard tool that can be used in market design. And I think that means that us and a lot of other potential developers in Ireland can then with confidence invest some business development money in making sure that we've got sites and planning permission and environmental consents, so that when the next auction comes up, we can bid with absolute confidence of being able to deliver, of course, subject to normal supply chain and other implications.
Okay, thank you, Paddy. We'll move to the next question, the gentleman here at the back. And if you can say where you're from, that was Henry from S&P.
Hello, I'm Leonardo from Terna. Thanks for the discussions, very interesting. I think the most interesting point for me was the take on retaining marginal prices with involving elasticity on the demand. But then in your discussion, I noticed that you talk about dynamic tariffs and customer engagement on one point, and then on the other to extend capacity market mechanisms, so long-term and firmer signals to protect customers. So are you suggesting to segment some of the demand to take part in elasticity and flexibility and then another in adequacy? Or what is your take on the role of the demand?
I think we had a good Slido question previously on. It's a combination of all. We understand that we have to, utilize all the elements that we have. At least that's how I see it from my side. Buying the demand side flexibility in the short term, and while working on those long-term solutions.
Can I complement very quickly? I'm going to make it very quick. So you can have capacity markets and have dynamic pricing as well, right? So you can structure it in a way that effectively everything before that is kind of an option instrument. So you can spill it into your spot and dynamic pricing as well.
Okay, and then I think we had a question over here, and then there was a question at the front still. Yeah. If you just say where you're from and who the question is for.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Gerber. I'm a business consultant and I specialize in strategy for the energy industry. First of all, thank you very much for a very interesting panel discussion. Paddy made reference, I think, to the complexity and also the continued need for investment. Mara made reference to the consumers and the vulnerables. Consumers, I simply have a question which is not always addressed and not very clear. My question is simply, and this is to the panel in general, can we afford this and do we know what the final cost is going to be?
Costas, you're the kind of person who crunches numbers.
I'm going to keep it very short. I'm going to say, I think we have to do something about the vulnerable customers, right? That's my very initial reaction.
Yeah, and certainly my view about this is that, and I know it sounds trite, but can we afford not to? And I think, so we had some examples, we heard some examples about the impact in Greece of changing climate. I think we can safely say changing climate rather than changing weather at the moment. Certainly we run some number of small hydro schemes in Ireland where it's always been nice and green and there's been gentle rain in many days a year. And we've looked at our water inflows since the 1950s. So we measure the water inflows on our rivers from the 1950s through to the current day. And when we look at a 25-day average rolling peak, we can look at that, and you can see that from 1950 to 1980 in the west of Ireland, we had an inflow of 300. From the 1980s to 2010, the inflows were peaking at 350, more regular floods, and peaking at 350. Over the last couple of years, we've seen inflows at 400. So in the space of from 1980 to 2020, we've seen an extra 30% inundation of rainfall. And that's just one kind of example. And we're seeing that everywhere. We're seeing farmers who are unable, and the stories around all that. So I don't think we can afford not to, is the basic answer. We've got to find a way of doing it with least cost, and we've got to find a way of doing it securely, and people have got to be confident. And you can certainly hear around Europe at the moment, and maybe hear some people say, yeah, I'm all for this, but we just need to be careful how we do it. And of course that's really important, as long as it isn't code for let's kick it down, let's kick the can down the line. I think it really is important that we do this, because we'll see the cost won't be in the electricity system, the cost will be emerging everywhere else if we don't do it.
Yeah, just to complement, I think I fully agree. We cannot afford not to do this, and the more we share the information that you are all experts here, the more we share with the policy makers, the better, because there is clearly this gap between the vulnerable and consumers, and we have to also take them into on board and deal with this. And the sooner the better. Again, the value of money. Money doesn't get any cheaper, so.
Okay, and then we have one final question down in the front row.
Thank you. Rémi, working for Enedis, the French DSO. One of the purposes of the market design is to protect consumers, and to do so, it brings in new options, like the possibility to have several contracts behind one single meter. One contract for the car, for example, one for the house, and one for the heat pump. What do you think about this opportunity?
Well, so Remy, it seems to me that it's wonderful in theory. just the question about, and I know meters are getting cheaper and technology is changing, but again, when we go back to there has to be enough value in this for people to make that investment. So that'll take some investment, whether it's in software or potentially in hardware and systems, and whether there's enough value there. It's not necessarily obvious that the value is there. I'd welcome Enedis's view, of course, but...
Yeah, first of all, I think even not getting into that level of tarification on the separate tariffs for all the different electricity consumption technology that one has at home, not even getting to that level, I think it clearly requires a certain level of smart systems and metering, which is unfortunately not the case all over Europe yet. And again, I don't have any calculations also on these kind of tarification schemes, but yes, we're getting there, and let's see. That's very futuristic.
And we need to have a bit of a balance between, simplicity and, optimization. Let's say having an optimized, right? I wouldn't want to be looking at 10 different electricity bills, let's say, for example.
Yeah, but I mean, it's probably really important that people have the choice. So if there is something that's worth doing, that people have the choice to do that. It does seem as if it's a time, given all the challenges that the electricity sector has to lift this, continue to lift this decarbonization process and journey. It does seem like a little bit around the edges and but anyway, it's important. It's probably important that people have the choice.
So I think we will end the Q&A session there. Thank you very much for your questions. We haven't finished yet. Hold your horses. We will just go down the panel one last time for a final key takeaway, and we're going to come from Kostas towards me. So Kostas, a final key takeaway.
So I'm going to be repeating a bit myself, but I think the EMD reform is a good starting point, but we need to dive into the details now, and there's a lot of things to be done. I'm going to say it for the third time. Paddy said it already as well, but we need to be quick as well, so we need to act, right? We need to do our due diligence, but we should not keep discussing forever on some aspects. And my final point will be, again, the consumers should be at the heart. The consumers are the ones that are the most important resource on the system, not the cables, not the batteries.
Yes, thank you. Since we have many actors here in the room, I just want to use the opportunity to once more emphasize the importance of independent energy regulators, because strong and independent energy regulators are crucial players in the energy transition and providing expert advice and independent decisions. And when comparing the roles of regulators in the various areas of electricity systems, different approaches currently apply. While regulators have a prominent position in a wholesale energy markets and consumer issues, their role in resource advocacy and infrastructure planning should be strengthened to increase the benefits independent regulators can deliver. Energy regulators also have an important role in incentive regulation and enforcement of compliance with which requires effective coordination at regional and also EU level. We believe that policymakers should therefore safeguard the independence of regulators and should provide them with sufficient resources to carry out their mandated tasks.
Thanks, Mara. And I would just say, certainly I welcome the new suite of market tools. Anyway, I think it's not necessarily where we will need to be to get to net zero ultimately, but there's enough there for us to be getting on with over the next period of time. I agree with Kostas. There needs to be some sort of certainty. Lots of investment is going to be required, and for the people making the investments, they need to see a horizon within which there's a reasonable level of certainty, and I think the market tools and give us that. And I think for now it's really, with the one maybe caveat just to call out, ultimately in the long term we're going to need some form of long-term clean energy storage. It's going to be really important. That won't be done with demand flexibility, I don't think. So how can we create an environment in which people are thinking about investing in that? But in the short term, we've got lots of tools there. We just need to get on and implement them, because ultimately, I'd say the people of Europe are looking to us to deliver net zero in the electricity system in the least cost and most secure way, so that they can use clean electricity to decarbonize the rest of society. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Paddy, Mara, and Kostas. I'd like to invite everyone to thank our panelists. I think it was an excellent discussion. I'm very glad that we got such different perspectives, but with the main takeaways are how important the consumer is for making the whole thing work in the end, and it's good enough for now, but there's a lot of work involved to make it work in the long term. So that's the end of our session today. Now it is lunch, and I can see the lunch, so you can see the lunch as well. It appears to be on the terrace, so I hope you enjoy that, and we will be back this afternoon with more interesting discussions. Thank you very much.
Thanks.